All right, everyone, hi. We're going to start. Shh. Quiet, please. Shh. Thank you. Okay, thanks so much. Welcome to. Is that coming from out there? Yeah. So we'll close. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Okay, hi. Welcome to Format. Eid Mubarak to everyone. My name's Shuman Basar. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks to my guests this evening, to Catherine Ince, to Sam Jacob, who I'll introduce in more detail in a minute. Thank you. A huge thanks also to Manijay, to Zainab, to Natasha, to Sep, to Sarah. Thank you all for putting this together. Wayne Daly has made these beautiful posters, which some of you may have seen that are in the booklet, but these are kind of special poster editions. They're available at the front here in the little bin, and they're for you, so please feel free to take them at the end of the talk. Two things important. One, please, can you turn your phones to silent right now? And also the second thing, for various technical reasons, we need you to turn off the Wi-Fi on your phones. Ahaha. Aha. So funny. But hopefully you all still have some form of connection. So if you're tweeting or Snapchatting, because I hear that's what young people do, the hashtag is couple format, as over here. I know, mystery. Okay, so we'll get started. Samuel Beckett once said about James Joyce's work in progress that form is content and content is form. A few decades later, and Marshall McLuhan declared that the medium is the massage. Inspired by these words, format is about the shapes that knowledge takes. What is the grammar of how we know or feel things? If there are hidden politics of presentation, what are they? This is the 6th issue of Format, what I call a live magazine. And these are some of the previous formats that we've tackled here over the last 5-6 years. Last year, we focused on the shape and form and poetry of what we called career formats. Now, at the core of this was the idea that life takes on a format, either designed or undesigned, from which we might understand our destinies better. Now, over the last years, maybe some of you have noticed the rise of the couple portmanteau. So the portmanteau is when two names in a couple are smooshed, it's a technical word, smooshed together to make Kimye, of course, Tomcat, Billary, Brangelina, Chlomar. Sounds like a nasty disease. I can't come out tonight with a really bad case of the Chlomar. And then Speederline. And so I think what the couple portmanteau do is turn the couple into a readily accessible headline. Clickbait, of course, like something that that draws your attention almost subconsciously to want to know what exactly is the latest update with Kim Kardashian's buttocks. All of you that just laughed have done that in the last hour. I know that. But also, of course, importantly, to turn the couple into a media brand, right? And I think this is also incredibly important and astute in all of these cases. their individual identities surrender to this Siamese fusion. And it could be argued that the celebrity portmanteau is just the latest iteration of the couple format. So, inspired by a comment made by the filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard, where he talked about the identity between love and work, can we think of working life together in tandem as something possessing shape or indeed format? A couple is, mathematically speaking, the smallest unit of collaboration and perhaps, therefore, the most potent form, or, of course, the most poisonous. Are couples design projects as well? Do they have narrativity, predestination, and myth built into their wiring? And what did Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin mean when they told us they were consciously uncoupling? Who hasn't heard of the term consciously uncoupling here? I'm interested. Hasn't? Okay. So, actually, who doesn't know who these two people are? This gentleman? Oh, just two people. Okay. So, on the left, one of the greatest singer-songwriters of our time, Chris Martin. And on the right, the actress and now entrepreneur, Gwyneth Paltrow. They were a celebrity couple, married for many years, had a child, one named after the brand of your phone in your pocket. And then after a number of years, as happens, the marriage came to an end. They chose to announce this on Gwyneth's blog, on Goop, I think, in fact, on the Goop blog, with a notice that said that they were consciously uncoupling, meaning that the termination of their relationship was something that they were doing with complete parity and in a sense of peace, and you know, of course, for their children and the future of their children. But this term suddenly entered again at the popular lexicon, to much derision, of course. But I think it also marked a certain, again, a new format of breakup in a way, and how breakup happens in this kind of mediatized age. So when thinking about your own future lives, paying heed to past couple formats, both successful and disastrous, may provide inspiration, solace, or simple guidance on how to be ourselves. To explore this, I'm inviting a number of notable guests to share with us one couple format that has, in retrospect, made some kind of mark upon them, either directly in what they've done through their work, through their research, or indirectly in how they might themselves approach this relationship between love and work, or this identity between love and work. Our own approach through these events will be in the tradition of format, which is informal, conversational, and as I said, in a way, a kind of live thinking. So, a few words about our first guest this evening, Catherine Ince. Catherine is Senior Curator of the Victoria and Albert Museum, where she is developing the curatorial program of V&A East, a new institution planned for the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. Previously, Catherine was a curator at the Barbican Centre, where she produced major survey exhibitions and publications, including the very, very brilliant The World of Charles and Ray Eames, which we'll hear more about, I'm sure, and also Bauhaus Art as Life in 2012. Prior to joining the Barbican, Catherine was curator and subsequently co-director of the British Council's Architecture, Design and Fashion Department, where she organized projects about contemporary design and architecture, and also commissioned the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennial of Architecture. Will you please join me in welcoming Catherine Ince?
Okay, hello everybody. So we've got a lot to get through. I probably have been quite ambitious with all of my slides, but thanks Shumon for a lovely introduction and for inviting me to reflect on the couple I've just spent 3 years investigating and thinking about. So Ray was a woman and not Charles's brother, as was often assumed, and he regularly had to correct people, and I had to correct a sub-editor at The Guardian in 2015 that Ray was also not Charles's brother, and in fact his wife, which was quite entertaining, much to Moore's mortification. So, who were they? Charles and Ray, as you can see here, in this nice sort of photo strip on the left-hand side, were designers. Charles trained as an architect. Ray trained as a painter. They were born in the first sort of decades of the 20th century and worked right up until the late 1970s and late 1980s. They met at the Cranbrook Academy of Art when Charles went there to finish up some studying at the invitation of Eliel Saarinen, the Finnish architect who was the director of Cranbrook at that time. And Ray decided to go to Cranbrook to develop her practical skills. She wanted very much to pursue and develop her skills in three-dimensional form, and took classes in weaving and pottery and so on. And there they met each other for the first time in 1940. Charles was actually married in this period to his first wife, Catherine Warman, who aspired to be an architect and kind of inherited her father's company, and because of the sort of gendered roles at that time, wasn't able really to pursue the career that she wanted. They had a daughter, Lucia, and it wasn't a very happy marriage by all accounts. And Charles and Ray met and fell in love, and that was the end of that. He left his wife, and within a few months, they'd decided to hotfoot it out of town, because it wasn't the done thing to leave your wife and child, and pursued a new life together in California. They were prolific in their life, their working life together. They developed some of the most kind of important, progressive, desired pieces of furniture of the 20th century. They are known for the house that they designed for themselves. They are known also for a range of highly experimental and influential multimedia projects that they completed in collaboration with lots of people at the office and other practices for clients like IBM in the 1960s and 70s. And I'm just going to talk about ways we can reflect on their sort of coupliness and togetherness as we go through some of the work that they produced over their very prolific sort of 40-year or so career and life partnership. So they started in California, and you can see on the slide on the right here, they're in the apartment that they moved into, designed by Richard Neutra in West Hollywood in Los Angeles. And this is really the beginnings of their collaboration. They notoriously set up a workshop in the room down in their apartment, where they started to explore ways that they could mold plywood in complex curves, which is an extension of work that Charles had begun with Eero Saarinen at the Cranbrook Academy of Art, a fellow student and subsequently sort of co-tutor of Charles's. And their work together had sort of been a catalyst for this desire to produce lightweight, mass-produced furniture for modern middle-class families in America at this time. And this picture is of their studio space, where they set up this very rudimentary heat molding machine, where they were experimenting with pressing plywood. And Ray's position in their sort of career, I guess, has often been marginalized by scholars and by lots of other people reflecting on their practice. I suppose Charles was probably quite he was quite a sort of strong character, somebody who put himself to the fore, I suppose. This is also a very different period of time, where women's roles were defined in certain ways. And Ray was also of the generation where she was probably happy to step back at certain periods and let Charles be more of the office of Charles Eames rather than the office of Charles and Ray Eames. But a lot of work has been done, particularly by scholars like Professor Pat Kirkham, who's a British scholar but has been based in America for the past 20 years, to sort of correct this view, or to look again at the role of women in professional and personal creative partnerships particularly. And she comes at their work very much with a kind of feminist design history perspective. It's very interesting that she it was quite... the definitive sort of biography that she produced in the early 1990s, which was a consequence of probably 10 years of looking at their work. Some of the things that she talks about are still aspects that you have to kind of explore and defend today, i.e. what was Ray's role in the office, and how do you delineate a professional and personal relationship, and is it even interesting to think about what X did and Y did, and how do you decouple or uncouple the work, or whatever the phrase is. So,
Catherine,
yeah.
The biography, is it biography of both of them?
Yes, it's about the work of Charles and Ray, and it sort of starts with little profiles of each of them and their background, and then really just looks at the entire output of the office, and those two as the heads of that office. And there are certain aspects where one is more Charles is definitely the photographer and the filmmaker, and Ray is definitely the one who is the master of form and color. But I think Pat's position is always, and I would agree with this, that some people look at that as the way that they've interpreted Ray's role has been to sort of negate those qualities and those abilities, as if it's anything lesser to be, very creative in form and color as opposed to anything else. What unites them, I guess, I think, is an interest in structure, architecturally, sculpturally, and sort of conceptually.
So did you say what they had studied at Cranbrook?
Charles went to sort of conclude some design studies, and then ended up kind of being the tutor of industrial design, which is a kind of newish course that they'd formed, or a newish sort of school. And Cranbrook is very much a kind of melding of, in the way that the Bauhaus was, I suppose, the sort of modernism and arts and crafts kind of heritage. And actually, he did lots of different things while he was there, working with students on the end-of-year shows, so highly interested in modes of exhibition display. And he was also commissioned to make a film while he was there. So there is documentary footage of this period of Cranbrook, which is a very rarefied kind of place. I don't know if anybody knows it or if anybody's been there, but it's sort of a suburban Detroit, if you like. It's a town outside of Detroit. If you go there now, it's really strange to go to Detroit and then go to this place with this sort of idyllic rolling landscape and these beautiful buildings and this very beautiful art collection and museum and this campus university. And at the time, you see lots of students tripping over to the Henry Ford to look at the latest exhibits of, whatever is in the Henry Ford collection, or whatever building he's taken from parts of the world to bring to Dearborn in Michigan.
But was this approach to being multidisciplinary, or not seeing boundaries between disciplines, something that they picked up at Cranbrook, you think? I mean, or is that too direct a link to
I think it's an evolution, actually. Charles is trained as an architect prior to that, hadn't been working as an architect, even though he wasn't sort of formally registered as one. He didn't really complete his studies, but he's interested in photography from a very young age. So you see that sort of coming through, and was quite technically capable in other disciplines, like he was very good at etching and so on. And Ray, I guess, maybe again a consequence of a woman's education in that period, had pursued a slightly more, singular route as an artist, but she was also very, very interested in contemporary dance. And she actually, in fact, was probably the more avant-garde of the pair. She spent time training with Hans Hofmann in New York, orbited around very progressive artists. I'm going to come on to talk about the fact that they enjoyed the couple format as well, a little bit. But for example, Ray was very close friends with Lee Krasner, who was married to Jackson Pollock, and in fact, Ray was the first person that they saw after the day they got married, and she went out and sort of bought them a bottle of champagne to celebrate with them. I'll talk about the Wilders, but Charles and Ray went on Billy Wilder's honeymoon with them also, so that's kind of weird, but there's a
Were they invited, or did they invite themselves?
Who knows? But I suspect it was all kind of jolly kind of Hollywood fun, or whatever they were doing. Anyway, so when they sort of start the office, it's in the context of the Second World War. They start producing their experiments in plywood at a much larger scale, making pieces for experimental aircraft like the one you see here. Of course, the wood leg splints is the catalyst for all of this, and they had the opportunity to work together and with their colleagues at this sort of rudimentary office that they were beginning to put together to develop their ideas in furniture, were really derailed by the leg splints. What you see here is a shot from the show that I made, and you can see 2 leg splints, a prototype stretcher, which is the only one in existence, and then on the left-hand side, one of the sculptures that's formed from the pattern sort of templates of these plywood leg splints. And I think it's really interesting that Ray corrects this as not sculpture. This is just material experimentation, and she's incredibly advanced and talented at form, and so you see the furniture progressing at this time, and her role in this is. It might not be in the technical development of the furniture, but it is in the evolution of the forms that they were developing. And there's been a lot of kind of critique from people who used to work at the Eames office that she was marginal, that she sort of hid herself away, she had no involvement in anything. And I think that those, you can read the archive legacy in quite a different way. And so I've been interested in trying to bring her to the fore much more, or bring her out of just the kind of textile designer and the painter, as she has the eye, she has the equivalent eye to Charles. It just gets expressed in a different way. She's like the ultimate kind of art director. She's highly organized, something that Charles spoke about a lot. And you can track that in their kind of relationship together. So they became known for then going on to develop, in pursuit of this idea of a single shell chair. They start to explore, not in plywood, which became difficult to achieve in the way that they wanted to explore that in different materials, most successfully, of course, in glass reinforced molded plastic. And this is Charles and Ray sitting together on the full-size model of La Chaise, which is a piece that they designed together with this collection of furniture here for a competition at the Museum of Modern Art in 1949 that was about low-cost furniture. And they were one of the teams that worked together with UCLA, who were given an extra bursary to develop this group of furniture, which was then the kind of starting point for the mass-produced pieces that you see today. I suppose I'm always sort of talking about Ray because it is about sort of trying to write this balance or to give her a sort of position. And you probably can't read this, and actually the bit that you need to see is right behind Sam's head. But this is later. This is later in the 1950s when they're developing the Eames lounge chair. And I'll come on to their sort of identity and the way that they work together in a bit, and I realise I'm probably spending far too much time. But they travel internationally extensively throughout their career, and it starts to build in the 1950s. And so Charles is in Paris. Ray writes a letter to him. It's a really incredible 4-page letter that's very revealing about her interests, what he should, his interests, what he should do while he's in Paris, including a little note that suggests that somebody from MIT had said that Charles should meet Jean Prouvé because he likes, prefabrication as much as you do. And then in the first page of this letter is a note from Ray to say, we were here working on the chair, and Sandro popped in. Sandro is Alexandre Girard. The Eameses were very good friends with him and his wife. They collaborated a lot together. And she just writes to update Charles on what they were doing in the office. They have a sizable office by this point. There are other people who are very skilled at designing and developing furniture. But this documents like this become important artifacts in looking at what involvement each of the couple had in the progression of their work. This is sort of, this sort of idea of togetherness and the way in which they work together is captured in these documents. I think a lot of their conversations and their work together actually happened in very, very private moments, at home, in bed, going to bed, over the dinner table, over the breakfast table. And I think that's also a part of this, which are these relationships which are very hard to articulate or very hard to extract information on when you're researching these kind of things. Sorry.
So I'm wondering when was the last time a large Eames exhibition was done before you did yours? Or,
well, it was the show that was put together as a consequence of transfer of a significant portion of the Eames office archive to the Library of Congress, which Ray worked on in the last 10 years of her life. So Charles died in 1978, and Ray and Charles together had formed a huge kind of affection for a cluster of public institutions in America, particularly the Smithsonian and particularly the Library of Congress. They were huge advocates for access to knowledge and to scholarship and information. They felt that sort of, knowledge was power, essentially. So they decided to give their archive to the Library of Congress. I can't remember quite what happened with the Smithsonian because they were in the running for a while as well. Anyway, the archivist at the Library of Congress spent 10 years working with Ray to pack it all up and transfer the archive over to the library at the end of the 1980s. And then they went through a period of 6 or 7 years of taking this material and turning it into a show, which they co-produced with Vitra Design Museum, who have a significant collection of their furniture, and of course were the main kind of European producers of their furniture since the mid-1950s. And that show toured for quite a few years. I think it started in 96, 97 perhaps, and came to London to the Design Museum in 1999. So the show that we did at the Barbican was in 2015 through 16, in fact, I got my new job while working there, anyway. So in that time, more material had come to light. Their work, particularly in the sort of information age, took on a very different significance, and the way you can look back at their work in relation to globalized communication systems and so on. So, yeah.
Maybe we could talk about. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. But I'm just.
I'm going to speed up because there's a lot to get through. Okay. So the house, of course, is one of the most well-known pieces of architecture from this period, and came about in the context of the case study house program run by Arts and Architecture magazine in the 1940s. And what you see on the right here, or the left rather, I'm really bad with my left and right, so forgive me, but I'm sure you'll figure it out.
One or the other.
Yeah. The illustration from the magazine is the kind of announcement of their project, and they designed two houses on one site next to each other, one for themselves and one for John Intenza, the editor of the magazine. And you see this illustration of themselves as this couple, and they're orbited with illustrations of things that they like to do, making, performing, listening to things, objects that they enjoyed very much, very sort of obsessed with material culture. But the house that you see underneath, the sort of drawing of the bridge house, a very Miesian proposition, mutated into the house that they built for themselves that we know today, which is banked into the hillside. They didn't want to sort of destroy the meadow. This great sort of playful modernist structure, which was very much designed for them and how they wanted to live and how they wanted to work within their house. They were obsessed with work, and that's something that they shared very much. They worked notoriously 6.5 days a week, often, 18 hours a day. You know this, you're all architects, you're probably going to go back to work now for like hours or something. But you see the beginnings of their sort of interest in documenting themselves, and how sort of consciously done this is arguable, but I think there's something here about this notion of the sort of self-branding, which is interesting. And in the archive of the Eames office that exists through the sort of family now, came across some documentation that sort of explained what this picture is about. So this picture is often okay, that looked weird. I thought it looked flipped. You see this picture, or multiple versions of this picture, where they're playing around on the structure of the house during its construction. They're sometimes on the middle beam or hanging off the side. And we found this little illustration, which was of the sort of multiple perspectives of them playing with the frame of the house, and fragments of collages, which suggested that they were going to make a collage of themselves in all of these different sort of apertures of the frame. So they're very interested in that sort of playful side, but it becomes something else. It takes on a different nature. This is a later shot of the interior of the house, and I just wanted to give you a bit of a sort of perspective of the house interior if you hadn't seen it. But this is a photograph by Julius Schulman, taken in, I think it's 58. The interior of the house doesn't really change very much after this point. Up until that point, it had been another canvas on which they kind of expressed themselves and their interest in different ways of living and material kind of and spatial expressions from different cultures. But you see this kind of presentation, this beginning to Charles and Ray, the brand, the identity starts to take form. I put this in to give you a sense of how they work together in this period, and this sort of intimate way of working. They have the house is, you can't see it here, annoyingly. This is the first block, and you can just see the beginnings of the second block of the house, which is the studio. And this is a space that was very much where they worked together quite intimately on personal projects that motivated them, making films, experimenting with film, before they wanted to sort of put that out in the world or use films more formally in their work. And you can see this is obviously them taking photos of one another in the same space. So they're kind of working closely together, and there is this togetherness in the early years that starts to disappear as their office gets very, very big and takes on very large-scale, high-pressured projects that require each of them to operate sort of more independently, but still be a kind of unit to the outside world, shall we say. They're experimenting with toys in this period, so they share this kind of interest in playfulness and in experimenting with form. And you can see some of this expressed in works like this collage, which is by Ray, as a proposition for a room set for an exhibition at the Detroit Institute of Art in 1949. And here is Herman Miller's showroom in Beverly Boulevard in Los Angeles, which is made around the same time as the house. It's a similar sort of architectural construction. And then what you start to see is Ray coming to the fore as a kind of master sort of stylist as well. She was extremely precise about everything that went into every photo, every showroom, every arrangement on their dinner table for guests coming for supper, more so than Charles, actually, I think. And sometimes accounts are written that she wasn't, she was a bit inarticulate and hard to understand, but you see her precision and Charles's precision less in their in the way that they sort of vocalized and talked about their work, but in the way that they presented their work when it was written down or through the projects and products themselves. There was one kind of like funny note from Herman Miller, employee, who wrote to Ray to say, "Mrs. Eames, I hear you have $7,000 worth of props in the showroom in blah-de-blah. Can you send me a list, because we need to insure this?" And that's about £80,000 worth of stuff that's just kind of hanging around, including at times, like you see here, a Giacometti that she borrowed from the local dealer. You know, and this sort of interest in avant-garde art is something that she possesses much more than Charles, who is a kind of classic Enlightenment man who's interested in science and technology. And so they, part of the studio practice is publishing themselves and publishing their work and preparing images for circulation. And you can see Ray sort of slightly hiding behind the cabinet, and Charles here looking a bit sort of scrawny, actually. And so she's quite shy in this period, but then they were also quite kind of playful, and this has become quite an iconic image of them, and one I tried to avoid actually in the kind of media campaign around the show, because everybody just wants to show this, and I've sort of felt like this was a spontaneous moment, and they had a few shots of film left in the camera, and the colleague who'd been shooting the wire chairs just said, "Why don't you come up on the roof and we'll just play around?" And then it becomes this kind of slightly nostalgic idea of them that is really emblematic of the sort of mid-century modern dream or something now, anyway, when you look back. But they also did things like this, you know, so they sort of perpetuated this idea of themselves. And this sort of together couple is particularly interesting when you know that, you know, Charles also had affairs. And the first thing anybody says to you is like, "Oh, wasn't he always just having affairs? And isn't it terrible to Ray?" And you're like, "Well, yes, he did. But, you know, they were married and they managed to make that work." And I don't know, it's really hard to sort of explore that line. And, you know, and The Office was kept together. And I think that there's an interesting sort of question there about professional breakups and personal breakups and what the sort of I don't know, staying together sort of means. I really need to speed up. Looking at their clothes is also really interesting as well. Like in this image, you can't really see it here, but they're pretty much wearing the same shirt fabric. They had a kind of uniform. They definitely cultivated a particular look for lots of different reasons, for functionality, but also for, you know, trying to sort of project a certain persona within the context of a business world and an art world and a corporate world, and the sort of idea of the designer in the 1950s. And you can see that as they get older, there is a kind of very strong relationship in the way that they present themselves, particularly through dress and accessorizing. And you start to see this coming through in the characterizations of some of the people that are in the films that they produce. So you've got here two shots from the same film, which is about the idea of and the production, and then the consequent use and sale of this compact sofa that they produced for Herman Miller in the early 1950s. And you have the archetypal, you know, couple who are really capable, and then the lady in the new look dress who needs her husband to come and help her. And sort of Charles and Ray are kind of in the middle of this. You know, they're very capable, but they're not quite as extreme as the couple on the left, but neither are they Billy and Audrey Wilder on the right. I put this in because it's the image that's been used on the poster, but actually this is the correct way around. The other one on the poster is flipped, but it doesn't matter. But what you see here is this sort of niche in their house, and this sort of intimate way of living was important to them. And this is where you start to sort of, you can see how they live their personal life a lot in the photography. This is a staged photo shoot for Life magazine. This is Billy Wilder and his wife Audrey, who's an actress, having supper with Charles and Ray. But this was something that happened regularly. Ray kept meticulous logs of what happened in the house throughout the 1950s. And you often see, like, you know, going to the dentist, cleaning the carpets, Billy's coming for dinner, then, you know, Hugh Cassin's coming by to do this. But they liked entertaining in in pairs with with other pairs. So they liked the couple format, and I think they found that socially manageable. Didn't really do the kind of big entertaining thing or sort of out in the world. So there's a kind of discreteness in a way that it would be interesting to talk when you show that picture of Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi, where you see Denise like this, and it's a different generation and different sort of forthright nature to the way that they present themselves. But they orbited, obviously, and influenced other couples, Peter and Alison Smithson. I'm nearly coming to the end, sorry. And I just sort of put a few more images here which speak to these more relaxed and natural kind of ways of being together. This is Charles and Ray at the Aspen International Design Festival in around 1953. Charles was speaking. Ray did not speak publicly at this period of time. It's only really when he passed away that she came to the fore in that way. And you see that change in their dynamic from the 1950s onwards. She's often portrayed in 50s TV segments as the little Mrs. Eames who helps her husband do stuff. And then later, she's much more forthright in front of the camera. But they are together all the time when they're working in that way, and particularly when they're orbiting around, communicating visually. They were both sort of obsessed with editing and taking photographs and using visual media to explore and explain the concepts that they wanted to communicate. They kept an enormous slide library. The Library of Congress archive is full of like 750,000 photographic documents that they amassed, not just slide transparencies, but prints and negatives and so on.
They're a kind of Google images.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing how prolific. I mean, I haven't really looked at like what that would have cost at that time to have all of that process, but it would have been pretty substantial. But it yielded amazing projects like the glimpses of the USA film, multi-screen film at the American exhibition in Moscow in 1959. And here's a shot of the Eameses with their team in a kind of mock-up model. It becomes hard to know exactly what they were doing, in terms of developing narratives. And Ray was not a very good photographer, actually. You can see that very clearly. When she's taken a picture, it's a little bit off. So he's the photographer, but she has the eye as much as him, and I find that really interesting. They also produced the IBM Pavilion at the New York World's Fair in 1964-65. This is them working in the studio with lots of teams were deployed on different projects, and designers came from lots of different backgrounds and had to work across different projects on different aspects. So you might be script writing, graphic design. The furniture guys tended to be the furniture guys, but you had to be quite sort of rangy when you were in the Eames office. And here's Charles presenting the IBM model to Lord Snowden when he visited the studio in California in 1965. And typically Ray is hovering at the back, and Charles, the extremely charismatic, very confident, slightly self-absorbed individual is of course to the fore. This is an interior shot of the multi-screen projection with inside the Ovoid Theatre, designed by Saran and Associates, mainly Kevin Roche. And this is a shot of Ray doing what she excelled at, which is, styling everything and making everything absolutely perfect. And it's really interesting the way the sort of aesthetic comes through in their work, and they're sort of like using very kind of kitsch, traditional, sweet sort of aesthetic to explore the latest sort of idea of computer technology. And here's just a shot from much later on in the office, actually, where Charles is working on a project with Barbara Charles, who's one of the office members in the late 1960s, which is an exhibition about the history of photography in relation to urbanism. And then Ray working on the design of the interiors and exhibitions for the National Aquarium proposal that they developed with Kevin Roche and John Dinkeloo Associates around the same time. And I think the office just became such a machine in a way that their roles were, to keep it going, but it became much more of a sort of splintered affair compared to, seemingly anyway, my interpretation, to the early years, where it was that sort of the nature of their relationship was much more together. Here they seem much more professionally together, and not necessarily always so personally so, but that's very hard to tell. I'm ending on this one, where you just see, you know, despite the trickiness of the personal relationship, they are a sort of, you know, intense unit, and they don't stop being that. Much longer than you asked for. Sorry, Shimon.
No, it's really, I think, a real privilege for us to have Catherine here, who's now officially one of the world experts on the Eames, like
I got a lot to learn
super
still.
person on the Eames. I do have a number of questions, but I know that they're going to touch on, I think, either in a similar or different way with Sam's couple, which are another American husband and wife architect couple. So to introduce our next guest, Sam Jacob. Sam has been a very regular guest of Format since it began. And there's a very simple reason for this. He's one of the finest and funniest voices today in the writing and thinking about the intersection of design and culture. I can scientifically prove that. Sam is also principal of Sam Jacob Studio, formerly one of the co-founders of Fashion Architecture Taste, and we talked about the birth, life, and death of that practice last year in career format. Sam's also professor of architecture at UIC Chicago, director of the night school here at the AA, and visiting professor at Yale School of Architecture. Will you please join me in welcoming Sam Jacob?
Thanks, Shimon. Yeah, it's really interesting to be talking about Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown straight after Charles and Ray Eames. Like, to give you a little bit of context, I think as Catherine mentioned, we're like kind of one generation later, essentially, also operating in America, in the world more of architecture rather than design. But you'll see some parallels, but you also see some difference in the way that their own couple format played out. And in some senses, it's a story about a boy and a girl and architecture, and it's a story about how those things can work together and also how they can't work together. And it made me think a little bit of one of my favorite duets, Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton. I'm sure you know the song Islands in the Stream. Do you not know it? Shimon, can you put it up on Spotify live?
I don't have internet connection.
Islands in. I'll read some of the lyrics to you. I won't sing. Islands in the stream. That is what we are. So first we think of the islands in the stream. You think of the stream as being, I suppose, life, and the islands being something which is kind of sits within this endless flow of stuff that goes through it. No one in between. How can we be wrong? I'm sure you all know that feeling. But we also know, I think, especially post-Brexit, that the idea of an island can be dangerous too. And there's one line in the song, which I think also serves as a warning. It says, "Too deep in love, and we got no way out." So you could think also of the kind of claustrophobia of the islands in the stream. So on the one hand, a kind of utopia. On the other hand, well, whatever we've done to this country, I suppose. So with that in mind, let me introduce the boy, Robert Venturi, who is American-Italian, a Quaker, studied at Princeton, and was the golden boy of a certain generation of American architecture, the favorite son of American architecture, who wrote this book, Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture, very important book in the 20th century, with an introduction by Vincent Scully, who was the kind of chronicler of American architectural culture and history. And in the introduction, he says, "This is the most important book about architecture ever written," essentially. And it's a great book. It's a great book, and it comes out of Venturi spending time in Rome, and it's an American in Rome and how he kind of responds to that. And it looks at mannerism and so on and so forth. But very, very good. And it kind of produces an architecture like this. This is the famous mother's house, designed for Robert Venturi's mother, which kind of implements the ideas in complexity and contradiction. And we see also in project, this is the incredible project, the American Football Hall of Fame, never built, where you see this kind of combination of a love of billboard culture with what's essentially a kind of a basilica behind it, this kind of combination of history and the contemporary. And, well, I'll come on to that, but this is the other character. This is Denise Scott Brown, who is born to a Jewish family in South Africa, and in Africa has, as she describes, and you have to remember that Bob and Denise have spent much of their time kind of chronicling themselves, telling their own story so often that it's become a kind of myth, perhaps more so to them than to anybody else. But part of Denise's myth is her experience in Africa and the kinds of things that she saw and the ways that she began to think about design. Now she leaves Africa and she comes here to the AA and studies at the AA, actually a little bit younger than the people like the Smithsons, who she encounters here. And in the encounter with people like the Smithsons and the independent group, she is in Britain at essentially the beginning of pop art. So this kind of period, this is Richard Hamilton's, what is it that makes today's homes so
different, so
appealing? Yeah.
appealing.
So this is a very kind of exciting moment in English culture or culture in London, which is trying to deal with the commercial imagery, a kind of post-war moment where colour and magazines and media become part of the art, design and architecture landscape, at least for a brief moment. After her time at the AA, Denise heads over to America, and she studies, I think, at Penn in Philadelphia. Very soon after finishing her studies, she is on the faculty where also one Robert Venturi is. And one evening, they meet. And they meet when Denise is making a speech to save this library, Frank Furness designed library, in a part of the campus at Penn. And they're both trying to save this amazing piece of architecture. And in some senses, you can imagine that moment where their eyes meet at this conservation meeting, both getting very angry about the idiotic, planning process that's going to destroy this, what is in fact an incredible building. And from this, essentially a kind of, you could say, they describe it as a friendship emerges, that they have so many common interests, but you could also see it as a kind of love affair, both between themselves, but also with architecture. And this really finds its most, I guess, touching moment in a series of photos produced in Las Vegas. Now, if you think of Bob Venturi as an American in Rome, Denise Scott Brown is a kind of colonial European in especially the west coast of America. She's the one who turns Rayner Banham onto the west coast of America and tells him about car parks and highways, and then he kind of steals the idea and writes, the stuff that he wrote about Los Angeles. But Denise takes Robert Venturi to Las Vegas, and they take these incredible pictures of each other. So Denise takes this picture of Bob next to this broken down shack where you can see the strip in the distance, him with his back turned to us, the viewer, just like a Magritte kind of surreal painting. And then here's Denise, oh my God, like standing in the landscape, like the most kind of electrified person you could possibly imagine. I've never seen someone look so like absolutely excited by the idea of the urban environment and this incredibly weird urban environment. Now, this is part of a studio that they're running at Yale, and they're taking their students to Las Vegas. And this is 1968, so you imagine most of the time students are on the street, protesting about stuff. Here's Bob and Denise taking their students to exactly the opposite. They're going to the heart of, I suppose, corporate, or maybe not quite corporate, but commercial American culture. And what they're doing there is looking for essentially weirdness. You see Caesar's palace, you see the Roman legionary and the parking lot simultaneously. And you can see here, perhaps, Bob's love of Rome, Denise's love of the West Coast colliding. And it produces, from the work that they do with their students, perhaps the most important book about 21st century architecture, researched in 1968 and published in 1974. And still, I think the most exciting book that describes architecture's relationship to modernity. But at the same time, the most touching, beautiful, I would say, kind of love letter, not necessarily to each other, but to a moment in time, to a place. And I think that comes from partly the moment in their relationship where the world looked absolutely and endlessly fascinating. And the book is full of diagrams about understanding the Strip, about understanding how this kind of debased commercial form of architecture actually works. They treat it incredibly seriously. They treat Las Vegas as seriously as architectural scholars had treated Rome. And in doing that, they find a new understanding of this, at that point, kind of misunderstood or ignored landscape. But when you see some of the photographs, and Denise was still is an endless photographer. The slide library in their office is absolutely overflowing, and it's full of these really beautiful images. Here's Denise in Las Vegas taking a picture of herself, taking a picture. Here's another picture of Bob and Denise in a reflection with these kind of concrete blocks. And the picture that I love the most is you sort of see this moment, this intimate moment between Bob and Denise driving down the Strip. Bob with his arm, on the back of Denise's chair. And I think at this moment you can see an absolute love of architecture, but also between themselves, a romance, I think, of all these things simultaneously. And of course it produces a new way of looking at architecture. I'd say that romance allows them to see the world in a different way. Things like this, which we still, are part of the architectural lexicon now, duck and decorated shed. But it's also a kind of coming together of much more than just Las Vegas. It's not really about Las Vegas. It's about culture in general. It's about a world of pop art, not just British pop art, but American pop art too. Andy Warhol is quoted in here. And you can see certainly the influences in their early kind of pop architecture projects. Here they are at home, an amazing home filled with Mickey Mouses and McDonald's drive-in signs, a kind of dream home. It's the kind of model for, I suppose, Tom Hanks's loft in Big. Absolutely full of fun. And at the same time, they're producing incredible pieces of architecture. This is the Ghost House, Franklin Court, which is a kind of outline of a house where Franklin once lived, and it's a sort of gigantic piece of public art, but at the same time a sort of piece of pop, sort of rhetoric about architecture. You can see how serious they are at the same time as having incredible fun. But I think this is a particular period of intense optimism, almost psychedelic joy in the possibilities of the world. And interesting to think of how the Eames' office and their relationship work, because I think something different happened to Bob and Denise. A project you should certainly see in London, which is the extension to the National Gallery, which is an incredibly smart project, but incredibly misunderstood, especially at the time, where essentially Bob and Denise were accused of being heritage mongers, friends of Prince Charles, enemies of modern architecture. And I think this is one of the moments you can see a kind of a sort of that they turn away from the world because they're met with such vitriol. Denise also, it's worth saying, has been met with vitriol amongst the architectural community because they've taken away our golden boy. We can't see Bob and have collegiate drinks without Denise turning up. So in exactly the same way as, Yoko got blamed for breaking up the Beatles, Denise gets blamed for taking away this sort of, this moment in American architecture. But you can see how happy they are at home, and also how they begin to decorate the home. You can see the frieze above their dining table, Le Corbusier, Toscani, Loos, etc. Now, another moment of I would say, where they turn away from the world is the Pritzker Prize, which is awarded to Robert Venturi in 1991. And Denise doesn't get the Pritzker Prize. And in some senses, you see here another kind of crisis, I think the kind of thing that Catherine's beginning to talk about, which is, okay, on the one hand, you could say this is, an issue, like totally sexist issue. They're giving it to the man. On the other hand, it's also a crisis of how do you deal with a couple in a professional world? Who did what? Was Denise the architect, or was Denise just the planner, or was she the one who just helped out? How do you attribute who did the actual work that the prize is going to? And I think this is a crisis certainly for couples, but also sometimes for groups as well. How do you who's the person I really want to speak to is the kind of call that comes from journalists, certainly. But this Pritzker Prize, I think, is like a massive insult to both Bob and Denise, who, though Bob accepts it, they do complain and they do ask for it to be given to them jointly. Belatedly, in 2016, they're given the gold medal, which is a sort of sop to I guess, that great injustice in 1991. I suppose the other thing they turn away from is postmodernism as it became. This is Philip Johnson's AT&T building in New York, which is based on a Chippendale a piece of furniture scaled up to skyscraper size. And of course, Bob and Denise are, they're certainly postmodern architects, but they're postmodern architects in the most exciting, interesting, and important way. And they then have this problem as postmodernism becomes a style, which is repeated by people like Philip Johnson, who's already been happily ripping off Mies for many years, and now he's, this is the latest thing, I'll do a bit of this. Of course, he moves on to many other styles, Decon at the end of his life. And I think this is also something which deeply troubles them. Denise says of Bob at some point that, Bob says, I am not and have never been a postmodernist, repeating the kind of thing you have to fill in on your American visa application about terrorism. And I think in some senses you can see something being taken away from them by these kind of essentially schlock architects doing stuff which looks a bit like them, which is derived from. And I can see this is also something which turns them away. So you have the massive argument about the National Gallery extension, you have the insult of the Pritzker Prize, and then you have the kind of debasement of essentially the movement which they create or they start. And what they do, I think, is retreat into themselves. You think back to the islands in the stream, that they suddenly become not part of and observing the flow of the river around them, but they become things which are quite isolated. And they retreat, I think, back into their office, in Manayunk, in a sort of suburb of Philadelphia, this being their office. They use their storefront as a kind of shop window. They retreat into their home. I remember going to Penn. We had a little exhibition in a corridor in the university there, and Bob and Denise came, and it was very kind of them to come to see this these sort of young English weirdos putting some printouts on the wall. And everyone was like, Bob, Denise, what are you doing here? They hadn't been to the school for so long, and they, I think, became so disengaged from architectural culture, partly because they were so angry with it. They felt they'd been treated so badly by it that they retreated into themselves. I think that's changed a little bit now. I mean, Bob's essentially retired, and Denise is still active, but very active as a writer. And in some senses, what her job, the way she describes her job now, is to write her living will to her architectural children, which is us, all of us. So they perhaps see themselves as a couple, not only with their own family, but with a kind of family that is architectural culture, and that's the kind of a thing which they want to nurture, I think especially Denise. And she uses this moment, which is essentially kind of post-retirement, as a way to try and right some of the wrongs, for sure, but also to try and communicate some of the things which they have learned, and their generation has learned, to us as we kneel by their feet and listen to the war stories of how it used to be in the olden days.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks so much. We have maybe about another 10 minutes, and then we'll have to call it. We'll have to wrap things up. I've got a few questions, but I'd like to ask you if you have any. Start percolating them, and then put your hands up in a few minutes. My first question is to both of you, and maybe it's the most obvious way in which these two couples, separated ostensibly by a generation and also by arguably historical, like sort of different historical tenor of America. But where they do seem to overlap is they both have periods of self-documentation, and this self-documentation through photography, of course, or through what you've shown us at least, and I want to ask about the other things maybe that you haven't shown us yet, but through the medium of photography, this constant reiteration of themselves as subjects and objects within their respective universes. Are they doing that for the same reason? What might that reason be? Is it something as simple and crude as building the brand, or is something else happening there? And what would it be to imagine both of these oeuvres, in a sense, with their presences almost photoshopped out? What would that do to the work? So, either of you, if you could say something about that.
I think it's definitely different. I think the pictures of Bob and Denise in the desert weren't published at the time. Like, they're not in this book. In fact, this book, although it's written as we and I, isn't exactly written as a kind of diary. It's not. These are not. These photos are more like holiday photos, or more like photos from a honeymoon, and they emerge much later. They emerge when a younger generation, it's like 2 or 3 generations later, make the pilgrimage to the office and go through the slide collection, which I think is very different from the Eames.
I think there's lots of different circumstances under which those images of them circulate and come into the world. So in the book that I made to go with the exhibition, we published a suite of images that were taken for Life magazine in 1950 of the Eameses at home. It was an article about the design couple and what they do at home, and they're sort of hanging out in Tenza's house and in the studio and leaning up against the door. And in the published article in Life magazine, There was one picture of Ray and the rest were of Charles. And so by publishing a kind of fuller body of work, you see both of them together. But so I think sometimes it's a kind of response to a media world that's interested in them. And then sometimes the photography is very informal, and it's just the kind of joy and pleasure that they take from, particularly Charles takes from taking photographs. And sometimes it's documenting the process and the making of work. But there are moments where it's very studied and very considered, and I haven't gone far enough, I don't think. I think you could probably write a whole book about this if you were to really look very, very carefully at where those images came from, when they were made, how they were circulated, and what sort of resonance they were hoping for them to have. And I think sometimes you will find similar circumstances where they're made more privately, and then later they come to the fore, and you can edit in any way you like to create a sort of position, and that's probably what starts to happen later, in fact, I think. Yeah.
Well, that would be my follow-up, which is because you previously used the word editing, and so many of, particularly of the pictures of Ray, is almost as an editor in chief. This book, Learning from Las Vegas, is a kind of editorial masterpiece. And maybe you should also, you've slighted the third author.
This is true.
Right?
This is true.
So please rectify history.
Well, it was indeed, it was a threesome. Stephen Eisenall was the third party involved in the production of the book and teaching the Las Vegas studio at Yale. Indeed, yes.
But it seems to me this notion of editing, of editing what goes in, but also importantly what goes out. I mean, that's ultimately the prerogative or the logic of editing, right? It's as much what you keep out, either of a shot, out of a book, out of a magazine, as what you put in. But this sense of editing one's life, editing one's career as it happens, through particularly I mean, with the Eames one, especially those images by Julia Schulman, this kind of Technicolor images. One can't also help but think of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And of a Hollywood couple as a basic unit, both of meaning and of value, and the way in which that kind of the saturated intensity of those colors produces a kind of hyperreal reality, right? Which is not necessarily life as it's lived, but life as one wants it to be lived, or one expects it to be lived, and in a sense that's like the precursor to the kind of when did they go to Las Vegas? 68.
68, yeah.
I mean, 67 is McLuhan, Medium is Massage, and Debord, the Society of the Spectacle, right? So we reach, in a sense, peak commodity culture by the late 60s, you know. And there's something that happens from there to there, but this sense of editing oneself as one's universe seems to me like a thing they have in common, but also as a way of living one's life that seems really interesting as a couple, but also as, you know, as figures in their respective universes.
It's interesting in what is real and what is fiction as well within that realm. I think you see lots of kind of moments of that hyper reality being played out, as you say, and the sort of, you can take the Hollywood lens, but I think that was quite different to the reality of their lived experience on a kind of day-to-day, week-to-week basis. They probably weren't at home entertaining that much. They were in the studio solidly, or traveling, and so you start to look at, you know, I've looked at, I don't know how many thousands of photographs of them at work, of the studio, of the way in which they used the camera to examine their own work, and they edited their own work through the lens of the camera, particularly furniture. They looked at furniture through the camera in order to see how it was kind of, you know, its form was kind of performing, if you like. And And then you start to see the other side, the tired side, the grisly side, the kind of intensity of it. And I think that only starts to get more and more, or becomes more and more the character of the office. I've sort of lost my train of thought. The Hollywood thing's really interesting too, and Pat Kirkham is currently working on a new book that is really looking at that kind of period in the 40s and 50s, because they wear their politics very lightly, and what's interesting about them is that they were deeply entrenched in sort of McCarthy era anti-communist activities, because they were friends with lots of people who had been, tapped on the shoulder and asked to, whatever, and that's a different again, another interesting side of that story, which reveals the sort of glamorized version, the Schulman version, to be not quite a truth. He took lots of props to his shoots as well. It would be great to have spoken to him about taking, that photo shoot of that house. Anyway, I've sort of lost my thread. Sam, say something.
The really nerdy, I wonder if, so the really nerdy essay I want to read, and if it doesn't exist, I'll write it, is about the Eames's kind of demonic propensity to smiling, right? It's this kind of like rictus grin everywhere.
Charles does this a lot. Yeah.
And, we're all sufficiently postmodern to kind of make postmodern analyses or interpretations where we see too much happiness. And I'm wondering whether, is there? I mean, can we read the smiling in another way than merely this kind of technicolor
optimism that Sam was speaking
or idealism?
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes you think it is a mask. There's a lot of. I mean, we haven't really spoken very much about the kind of office dynamic, and that that's hard to get a grip on. Any large studio is a place of intensity and tension, and there were a lot of tensions about the fact that it was the office of Charles and Ray Eames above the door, as it is with lots of people who have practices that are named after individuals or a number of people. There's a sort of question of attribution and question of the work that's done by other people in the office, and I think there were those smiley pictures masks a lot of that, the true nature of work. But then when you speak to people who work there, they were, they sort of enjoyed that toughness, and they rolled with it because what they were doing was so fascinating and absorbing for them. So, there were difficulties. But I don't know. I just spoke to Richard Wentworth about this a little bit, and he's sort of very of the view that there was a sort of sincerity to the optimism of that time. And I think that does start to wane for the Eameses in the late 1960s. Their work changes in character, and the projects that they're taking on are about taking a position on what's happening with environmental conditions. That's really what the National Aquarium Project is about. They're very aware of counterculture, even though they are the establishment. Yeah. They're still interested in the avant-garde practices of pop artists, and they were going to Klaus Oldenburg's happenings in the 1960s and things. So it's there. It's just not something. I think it is an interesting essay to write, and you should write it in terms of just like how you can flip the way that the media world chooses to present them. And I think people find it very easy to just see them packaged so simply and without problematizing that in a way.
Are there any questions? Do we need... Yeah,
no.
Sarah, can we pass the mic down here, please? Just so it gets on the recording.
Your essay could be titled From Grin to Duckface.
We'll write this together, right? Done. Madeline?
I think what's interesting...
Can you use the mic? Yeah. Go for it.
What's interesting about your slides of...
It's retaliation. About Venturi's
I've never seen them smile,
Yeah.
really. And the photos present a giddiness that seems really authentic, where, there we go. Whereas, anyway.
Check the light has to be green. Just check if you can press it. Just on the light.
They were going to hear it.
It's just for the recording, guys.
Sorry.
So you got it on the top and just put it up.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyway, the grinning of the Venturi seems, or Venturi and Scott Brown seems so authentic in a way that I had never seen before. And I think you're right, that they're really kind of presenting it as a love affair that they're kind of developing with place. And it's so very different from, I think, the Eames, where the smiling is about kind of presenting and projecting a life and a lifestyle and a kind of new post-war kind of realm where giddiness is something to be kind of coveted or try to strive for. And to go back to your introduction of duckface, I kind of question or wonder, I mean, who hasn't done duckface? Who's not taken a selfie with duckface? I want to see hands. Exactly.
Liars.
And I just wonder, in looking at the essay, what the kind of condition of the smile or about the kind of face, where you don't see architects smile ever now. It's just not part of the persona. And so those two, or those sets of images, are really interesting because precisely they're kind of projecting either intentionally an identity, and in the secondary one, kind of, I think, documenting an experience and a time in a way that's really interesting. And I just wonder what duckface is saying about us, and what we will kind of begin to understand and unpack 10 years from now. Anyway, just as an introduction to your essay.
You could think that obviously maybe the difference is that Venturi and Scott Brown is like suffused with irony. The humor is like it's incredibly, everything's incredibly funny, but it doesn't smile. It's that kind of humor, which is also, I suppose, perhaps to do with the complexity of that moment where things actually weren't quite as optimistic as they would have been, in the
Vietnam's already had.
Exactly. But then also you think, what does it mean now? Like, now that you could, when you follow someone on Instagram, you might see their professional feed, but also their, live photoshops, Natasha, that you see behind the mask of like the official photography. And so if you were Bob and Denise, you'd be revealing your, fun snapshots in the desert at the same time as also posing for your serious photograph. And so maybe now it's much harder to separate the space between the domestic and the public, which I think is all part of the crisis of both Charles and Ray, but also for Bob and Denise, is that they're desperate for the domestic and the professional to coexist, but the professional keeps demanding that it stops. It is unacceptable. There's something wrong with it. But actually, that was, I think, or is their practice. But maybe technology is blurring that distinction between the two.
And just before we go to Madeline, I wonder whether, in these sort of broad canonical tags, one would think of the Eames as exemplary modernist, and then, Venturi, Scott Brown as postmodernist, as much as they might want to shirk away from that, but let's not kid ourselves that, indeed in complexity and contradiction, in a way, the sort of source code or the ur text of postmodernism, are they a modern couple and a postmodern couple? Or are they, I'm again interested in, sorry? Proto-postmodernist. Yeah, it's again just what Sam was saying about, I guess, the line between professional and private, and whether the more radical you are in your professional expression, the more conservative. The last image is kind of amazing, right? Like it's like a cave of suburban Chuchka, and so. Postmodern, sorry, I want to start with you, Sam, what can one think of them as a postmodern? Is there anything about them that where their postmodernity was mapped onto their coupleness, you think, or not?
I think incredible self-awareness. I would say,
Right, yeah.
like even you look at this picture. This is the house that's full of, all kinds of relics of kind of contemporary culture. At the same time, it also looks like the most suburban kind of dream you could possibly imagine. Bob watching his favourite British sitcom, Keeping Up Appearances. And in a sense, you could say there's a certain radicality in the way that that he dresses in like Brooks Brothers clothes. It's a sort of like, I always think of them as a little bit like the Ramones, like the formula will not be changed. And there's something absolutely hardcore, but the hardcoreness is like the opposite of hardcore. Like, and that I think is like I would say that is very postmodern. Yeah, it's like normcore before the. Yeah.
I think you can overlay that on the Eameses as well, actually. And Venturi sort of identified that about them too, and spoke a bit about their sort of, they're making sort of Victoriana kind of acceptable, and they were their tastes were sort of probably quite modernist in a way in terms of the sort of cultural sort of track, but they were also not modernists in that sense too. They were quite distinctly different from that.
It's often those moments that are some of the most interesting, where the proclamation of the background and the kind of world that it promises versus the politics of the foreground as them as subjects and the kind of weird schism between, that's what I in a way I think almost can be boiled down to the smile, like the problem of the smile. We're running out of time. Maddie, last question. Yeah, go. Can we? Green light.
Tough, aren't they? Complicated microphones.
Oh yeah, it works. No, I'll be very short. I'm just very annoyed usually with all these people who want to separate the two people working together. You all know how it is when you work together. I've had a lot of experience not working together in the same room. And I know that just the presence of somebody there is already enough to make your work, what you're doing, differently. And so this whole thing, the hysteria around Charlotte Perriand, the whole family wants her to know what she's done, and they want to know that she's done, they want to prove that she's done everything, basically, so they inherit everything. But there's a lot of now the separation, and I don't believe in that. I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong to say they did that, they did that. You don't do things when you're alone that same way.
No, I think that's completely true. And who's to know what you're looking at the photographic documentation of something. You can't possibly know anything about the energy that's in that space as you're working together in the same room, in the same office, or in two different offices, but you're connected.
But also when you talk together, one says something and you take it a bit further, and the other one take it further, and it doesn't happen when you're alone. That's sort of taking things in some kind of direction.
I think that's exactly right. Bob and Denise say that they play this game when they're driving, which is who can like the most horrible thing, and they sort of like to outdo each other in like the most disgusting thing. They can find a reason that they could possibly accept it into a world of kind of thinking about architecture. And I think it's exactly that kind of relationship of like it's not just what you do. It's a the way in which your life, I guess, expands outwards from being, in their case, a romantic couple, into being in the world, into making things in the world. And I think you absolutely can't draw the line between those things. And it's especially difficult if you are, living together and working together, that you don't even know when one would stop and the other one would start. What is professional? What is personal? I think that's...
The problem with Denise was that she got embroiled in that thing. Like, what have I done? I have actually done it. So when she was talking in the AA, she was just sort of all the time trying to justify and sort of reiterate how things had worked and what she had done. And in the end, Venturi was sitting in front and he said, "Oh, shut up now."
Yeah, but I don't think that's also fair enough.
She goes on, she's a talker.
She is, but I think that's also fair enough. It's like if you know, because of what happened to them in terms of other people saying, no, well, I'll give the prize to the guy. Here, guy, come and have your golden medal. That you know, I would say that's a kind of equal and opposite and justifiable reaction, and the kind of reaction that, you know, you would hope we wouldn't need that to happen to younger generations. But of course, we know that things don't necessarily get better as time moves on.
We have run out of time. I ask you all to join us here on Friday, same time, 6 o'clock, 2 more great guests and 2 more really fascinating couples. So thanks all for coming. Do take some posters if you like. Please join me in thanking Catherine and Sam. Thank you so much.